Alrighty, we are on lesson 66, King John and the Magna Carta. I am gonna read it to you. Let's see, I'm gonna get comfortable again. My crocheted blanket my mother made me. Okay. I typically write about famous people in this book, but today I'm going to write about a famous English document. It's called the Magna Carta, which is Latin for Great Charter. Although it is really just a piece of paper, it contains important ideas that have influenced the world. Let me tell you the story of how great this great charter became so great. It's a lot of greats. We've already established that great is probably like the most used descriptive verb for people and apparently documents. Okay. In order to understand the writing of the Magna Carta, you will need to know who King John was. He has already been mentioned in several lessons. Do you remember him? John was the favorite son of Henry II, the disappointing son of Eleanor of Aquitaine, and the embarrassing brother of Richard the Lion-Hearted. Like a spoiled child, John fought with Richard for years over the throne of England. As the older son, Richard had rightfully become the King of England after Henry II died. But as you remember from a previous lesson, Richard was unexpectedly killed by a crossbow at age 42. His death opened the door for John to become the King of England in 1199. Unfortunately, John had been recorded as one of the worst kings that England ever had. That is why he's always portrayed as the bad guy in the stories of Robin Hood. It is important that I explain what gave John such a bad reputation, because it was his awful reign that led to the writing of the Magna Carta. King John. King John had numerous flaws, but mainly he was cruel. This was especially apparent in his treatment toward the Jews. As we learned in another lesson, countless Jews were mistreated during the Middle Ages. In 1220, John imprisoned all the Jews in England after he stole their money. Many were tortured. But King John's cruelty did not stop there. He was harsh to his own countrymen. When it came to keeping strict laws about the forest, if you remember, an English forest was a special hunting ground for nobility. John hoarded these properties and severely punished intruders. This was the basis for his evil side in the tales of Robin Hood. And closer to home, King John was even cruel to his wives. He divorced his first wife in order to steal another man's fiancée. Her name was Isabella, but after marrying her, John neglected Isabella and had children from other mistresses. Tisk, tisk. As might be obvious, King John was not a godly man of strong faith. On the contrary, the monks who knew him best thought he was an atheist. An atheist believes there is no God. Apparently, John lived much of his life acting as if there were no God. He once had such a spat with Pope Innocent III that he threatened to banish all the church leaders from England and put out the eyes and cut off the nose of some of them for good measure. As a result, the Pope closed the churches in England except to perform baptisms. The church bells stopped ringing, and the dead were buried without any religious ceremony. It was a dark time for England. I kind of think that right now is a dark time for our churches, since we're not getting to meet because of this coronavirus, and people aren't getting to have funerals without many people getting to attend. Anyway, I digress. Eventually, Pope Innocent excommunicated King John from the church. Of course, spiritually, John didn't really care and ignored it. But in time, he needed the support of the Pope for political reasons. In order to get back to good standing with him, King John surrendered his crown and the entire kingdom of England to Pope Innocent III. In the arrangement, the Pope gave England back to John within 5 days, but only for a certain amount of money. King John had really made a mess of things. His nobles were furious with him, but probably nothing made the nobles and barons more upset with John than his ridiculous taxes. England had already been heavily taxed under Richard the Lion-Hearted to help pay for the Crusades. With the Crusades over for a while, people expected taxes to be lightened, but instead, John raised them even more for his own personal gain. England had had it with King John. It was said of him, "We search in vain for any good deed, on one kindly act to set against his countless offendings." Wow. The writing of the Magna Carta. For 2 years, the nobles and barons of King John tried to force him to follow the laws of the land. In those laws, the power of the kings was limited, but John refused to comply. So finally, there rose up against King John. Their aim was not to fight or kill the king, They just wanted to make him behave. This army of nobles and barons met King John at a place called Runnymede. It was a meadow near the Thames River. John had run out of excuses with the barons for his bad behavior, and he didn't have enough supporters to fight for him. So, at Runnymede, on June 15th, 1215, the barons forced John to put his seal of approval on the Magna Carta. He couldn't actually sign the document because John didn't know how to write, but his kingly seal was enough to put the Magna Carta into effect. What exactly was this document? It basically was a list of rights. In 63 articles written in Latin, the Magna Carta gave rights to the barons as well as to free the people under them. Most importantly, the Magna Carta put limits on the power of the king. For example, should the king not follow the law? The Magna Carta allowed 25 nobles to fight against the king without being guilty of treason. This meant that the king's authority did not go above the law of the land. Rather, the law was above the king. I hope you can picture just how important the concept is. The amazing thing about the Magna Carta is how it has been continually used in history. It was used later to coin the famous phrase, "no taxation without representation." This means that no one should pay taxes to a government without having some say in how the government is run. This is still considered a fundamental right in free countries. The Magna Carta was also used to guarantee people a trial by jury in the event they were accused of a crime. That is also considered a fundamental right in free countries. To some degree, the Magna Carta helped to shape the Bill of Rights, as many nations, including the United States, Canada, and France. As you can imagine, the Magna Carta was used to keep kings from being dictators. Two later kings in England, Edward II and Richard II, were both deposed by the English people using the Magna Carta. Deposed means they were removed from the throne, legally. You can see where the chartered placed power in the hands of the people. For that reason, the Magna Carta had been called the cornerstone of liberty and the basis for democracy. Some would say is the most famous document in history. As for King John, he didn't appear to learn any lessons from the Great Charter. He immediately went against the document and tried to fight the barons who forced him to approve it. Not much later, in 1216, King John died suddenly of disease. He was only 49. His son, Henry III, became the next king at just the age of 6. He proved to be almost as bad a king as was his father, except that he inspired expansion of Westminster Abbey. But well into Henry III's reign, the Magna Carta was in effect, giving the people of England some protection from his high taxes. I hope you can appreciate the significance of the Magna Carta. Without it, England and many free countries, including the USA, of the world might look a little different today. And there you have it, the Magna Carta. Lesson 66. You're welcome.